Who are some of the kind of major figures that we're talking about in Lutheranism? The first and obvious one is Martin Luther, right? So that one we know, okay? We know Luther. His name is stuck there in our names, so everybody knows Luther. But I think the unfortunate thing is a lot of people I talk to from outside of the Lutheran tradition, when I mention Lutheranism and Lutheran theologians, they've never heard of anybody except Luther. And it gives this idea that we only had that one guy. Nobody else after that really had anything good to say. No, but there are some wonderful writers, theologians, devotional writers, and this is just a small selection of them. So what I've chosen to do, I basically grabbed the number 6 and said I'm going to put up the 6 most essential. Maybe I should have done 7 because that's the holier number, right? But I don't know. But these are 6 major figures that have shaped Lutheran theology, probably more than anybody else. And I think definitely more than anybody else, actually. Which is kind of why I was like, I don't know if there is a good 7th that kind of. There are plenty of great theologians, but that would quite live up to these names in terms of influence, at least. So this doesn't mean these are the best theologians within Lutheranism, by the way. This is just saying these are the ones that have the most significant impact. First, we've got Martin Luther, obviously, Philip Melanchthon. Now, Philip Melanchthon was, he was the kind of right-hand man of Martin Luther. But, not only that, but Melanchthon also wrote significant portions of our confessions. So he was the major writer of the Augsburg Confession. He was the author of the Apology of the Augsburg Confession. He was the author of the Power and Primacy of the Pope, which means that Melanchthon wrote more of our confessional documents than anyone else. And Melanchthon wrote some wonderful theological works. He wrote a great commentary on Romans. Melanchthon was a wonderful scholar. He was in that humanist tradition that you see within the Renaissance. Very different kind of mind than Luther, which I think is really good. I think that was very healthy to have these different kinds of minds coming together. Martin Chemnitz, then. Martin Chemnitz is the first real systematician of the Lutheran Church. Now, Melanchthon was systematic, but Chemnitz was in that second generation. So in that generation of theologians, Chemnitz was able to take the works of Luther, the works of Melanchthon, the things they talked about, and really systematize them, create the helpful categories, do some contrasting work, put a lot of nuance to the developments that had happened in the era of the Reformation. And Chemnitz becomes the major author of the Formula of Concord, along with Andre as well. So if there was a 7th on here, it would probably be Andre, but Chemnitz really does, I think, stand significantly above Andre in his theological ability. Andre's great, don't get me wrong. Okay, then you have Johann Gerhard. That's the one in the picture here. So his years are 1582 to 1637, and Gerhard is the most significant figure of what is often labeled Lutheran orthodoxy, sometimes called Lutheran scholasticism. He is the thinker that has the most extensive systematic theological writing that just defends Lutheranism point by point by point in the most minute little details. But along with that, this is why Gerhard is, I think, so wonderful. He was also probably the best devotional writer within the entire Lutheran tradition. I mean, he is a deep piety, a deep spirituality. The theology, though he was so academically gifted, was not just an academic exercise. Gerhard was a very devoted Christian and had a very active life of prayer and piety. So we do have plenty of other scholastics after that. Some of them get even more scholastic and more detailed about particulars. But Gerhard, I think, strikes the balance best of any of these figures. Then you have Johann Arndt. His years are 1555 to 1621. Arndt was the most influential devotional writer within the Lutheran tradition. He wrote a series of 4 volumes titled True Christianity. And this was really at the time, it was known as the best-selling work of theology ever. There are some scholars of Lutheranism and of Pietism, which is a movement later within Lutheranism, that have said that Arndt's influence is so significant within the Lutheran tradition that it may surpass even that of Luther himself. Now, Arndt is not as well loved today. He's not as well known as the other figures, probably by most people. But Arndt's influence devotionally was so significant that he was used within Russian Orthodox seminaries. He was translated into so many different languages. He was read widely by the Reformed, even by Roman Catholics. So Arndt was massive in his influence. Whatever you think about him, because there's critiques of Arndt, so you may not like him. But again, this isn't the question of who are the best theologians, but this is who are the ones that are the most significant in the tradition. And then finally, you have Philip Jacob Spener. His years are 1635 to 1705. And Spener is the founder of Pietism. Pietism being a movement that develops toward the end of the 17th century, really has its kind of major heyday, I guess, if you want to use that term, in the 1700s, so in the 18th century. And the 18th century becomes basically for Lutheranism the century of Pietism. Now, Pietism is a movement that's widely criticized, and there's a lot I could say about Pietism, but it is a movement within Lutheranism that is trying to move away from what was perceived to be a kind of dead orthodoxy, that there was an idea that, and this seems to be the case from what you read historically at the time, that within some Lutheran churches, there were people who so loved the particularities of Lutheran orthodoxy, which I love those things, but that the sermons were basically these lengthy doctrinal expositions. There was no real pastoral care. There was no care for the average Christian life, really. It was, we debate doctrine and talk doctrine, and that's it, which is not the purpose of the role of the pastor and the purpose of the sermon. There's doctrinal instruction, but not solely that. So Spener is the founder of a movement that gets the name Pietism, which is a movement that emphasizes regeneration. It emphasizes a changed heart. The way that Pietism, and Pia Desideria is his major work, and he has a number of reforms that he proposes. And the major of those is that he's promoting Bible studies, what we would think today as small group Bible studies. If you're in a small group Bible study in any way, you are indebted to Spener in some way. That really was, he was the one who really emphasized that and had an impact all over the place in all sorts of traditions as well. All right, so again, Spener is criticized a lot. People don't like Pietism, but Spener cannot be left out of any history of Lutheranism. And I will say that regardless of the errors that later Pietism often had, Spener was quite Lutheran in his doctrinal convictions, and he was repeatedly clear about that as well.